Welcome to Psychological Explorations with Dr. Michael Axelman.
And Daniela.
And John.
Today we're going to be exploring Winnicott's 1968 paper, The Use of an Object and Relating Through Identifications. This is one of his later papers, and it consolidates a lot of his theory from the decades prior. In the beginning of the paper, Winnicott refers to the importance of waiting. And we're going to be describing a phase of development that the adults have to wait through until the child is reaching towards what we'll be discussing as object usage. And I quote, "It is only in recent years that I have become able to wait for the natural evolution of the transference arising out of the patient's growing trust in the psychoanalytic technique and setting, and to avoid breaking up the process by making interpretations. It appalls me to think how much deep change I have prevented or delayed in patients by my personal need to interpret." And we add at the bottom one of Winnicott's most quoted and cited phrases, sentences. "The principle is that it is the patient and only the patient who has the answers." So we're waiting for the patient to reach over towards the solution to their developmental problem. And it's something that just can't be explained with words. What we're talking about today is a process, an experience that must be lived through with significant adults. So we begin with this idea of relating, object relating, which happens through identifications. There's a child, adult, who projects and relates to the other object by identifying with one aspect of them. Here we're talking about part object, and engages in object relating as if the other was there only to serve their personal agenda and stated needs. What we have here is a one-sided partnership born of omnipotence. What is it that you are going to do for me? That's the perspective of object relating. The thing that there is between relating and use is the subject's placing of the object outside the area of the subject's omnipotent control. That is the subject's perception of the object as an external phenomenon, not as a projected entity. In fact, recognition of it as an entity in its own right. So we have this sequence of developmental events where there's a facilitating environment, a caretaker who creates this near perfect, or what Winnicott calls the perfect environment, that has mild to moderate amount of failure built into it. And it's in this setting where the child's able to move into object relating. So we imagine the infant who's getting ready for a feed, and a parent who is tuned into this infant and knows that the infant is developing a hunger, and then is able to deliver the breast or the bottle at that perfect time where the baby believes that they're both finding and they're creating this experience. That level of attunement where you imagine it and your needs get met, and you imagine it and your needs get met, moves one into this place of object relating, where they just assume that that object is there to serve their needs, which it most certainly is. And this is the place of object relating, and the move that we're going to be talking about into usage is towards seeing the other as distinct, independent, operating in their own right. Placing the analyst outside the area of subjective phenomena, outside the area of omnipotent control. This interpreting must be related to the patient's ability to place the analyst outside the area of subjective phenomena. The object, if it is to be used, must necessarily be real in the sense of being part of a shared reality. But in examining usage, there is no mistake. The analyst must take into account the nature of the object, not as a projection, but as a thing in itself. So the analyst moves out of the subjective into the objective. Somebody who has real feelings, who has pain, who has seen the child through a period of strain, and the child's growing awareness of this is part of the shift. Caring adults and the facilitating environment. So the development of the capacity to use an object is another example of the maturational process as something that depends on the facilitating environment. So just as the facilitating environment supports the little bits and pieces of the baby coming together as unit status with the mother and the baby are one. And then there's this hatching that coincides with motoric development, crawling, moving away from the mother, and this experience of not me and me that we've discussed in other presentations. So this capacity to use the object, the facilitating environment has to operate in a particular way. And we're going to talk about some of those key relational markers that are so important to see a child through this stage. And Winnicott makes a nice nod to Phyllis Greenacre, who has written some beautiful things as well on the facilitating environment. The most irksome of all early failures that come from mending. This is one of the examples of having to learn and use a psychotherapeutic technique while you're experiencing such a degree of irksome annoyance, nuisance driven behavior. First, there is object relating. And then in the end, there is object use. In between, however, is the most difficult thing, perhaps in human development, or the most irksome of all early failures that come from mending. This change from relating to usage means the subject destroys the object. You have value to me because of my destruction of you. It is the destruction of the object that places it outside of omnipotent control. So the child tries to destroy, tries to change the attitude, the comportment, the way of relating to the child by their efforts of Winnicottian term to destroy. So this is the effort of the child to make the parent or the analyst engage in bad technique. So they go outside of their zone. And when they go outside of the zone, they're destroyed as that steady, continuous object. And if they react or if they retreat, they reinforce the child's sense of omnipotence and power. Survival is involved keeping a low level of reactivity and showing up, being present in those very destructive moments that one feels like it's so hard to be present and non-reactive. And it's a phase, it doesn't last forever. Once the end is reached, it's as if the child transforms in a moment and moves into the next developmental phase of use. This change from relating to usage means the subject destroys the object. You have value to me because of my destruction of you. It is the destruction of the object that places it outside of omnipotent control. It could be physical, like getting pinched. It could be a mess where you're drinking a drink with the child and the child spills the whole cup on your lap, kind of accidentally and kind of on purpose. They might themselves get messy. These are all ways of trying to see if they, through their power and influence, can destroy, can push the parent or therapist outside of the zone that they want to be in, that they know they ought to be in. So we're talking about this shift from projection, from part object relating to reality, to whole object relating, through the survival of destructive attacks. This experience depends on the object's capacity to survive. It is important to that survive in this context means not retaliate. This destructive activity is the patient's attempt to place the analyst outside the area of omnipotent control. Without the experience of maximal destructiveness, the subject never places the analyst outside and therefore can never do more than experience a kind of self-analysis, using the analyst as a projection of a part of self. So in relating, the adults are engaging with the child as if they're the central part of everybody's experience. And with usage, the child then is placed one among many in the family who all have competing interests. And the child at that point starts pushing towards mutuality and developing perspective taking of other people's experience as whole people. So as we talk more about this idea of destruction, to get a little flavor of it, it can happen at the breast with the child using their gums or their teeth to create a tension point for the mother. And the mother can become aware of how hard it is to receive this child's communication because it hurts. But they don't pull away completely and leave the child unsatisfied. They move through this phase and accept that perhaps the child was waiting too long, or they're needing to experience this distinction between me and not me. So as the child's wondering if perhaps this breast is part of themselves, and then they chomp on it and there's a pullback and a little squeal, there's confirmation that that's not me, that's separate from me. So this move into usage is very much related to what Winnicott is referred to as this capacity for concern that gets very deepened at this time, where the child's able to see the parent as nested in a shared reality. And when they're away, they could worry about them. And when they come back, they can share their concerns and the mother can receive them. And here we're weaving in this conversation around usage and strengthening usage. So it is truly maddening to survive through non-retaliation. This idea of holding the situation. These attacks may be very difficult for the analyst to stand, especially when they are expressed in terms of delusion or through manipulation, which makes the analyst do things which are technically bad. I refer to such things as being unreliable at moments when reliability is all that matters, as well as to survival in terms of keeping alive and of absence of the quality of retaliation. When the analyst knows the patient carries a revolver, then it seems to me this work cannot be done. And that's kind of a little wink, wink from a footnote. But these attacks are very difficult, and they could involve getting your foot stomped on, kneed in the groin, coffee spilled all over your clothes, paints, whatever the activity is, the child will be unconsciously compelled to move into this destructive activity. So on one level, they're hoping to destroy, but on the fuller, deep level, the child is hoping deeply for survival of these attacks. So the key point here is the maintenance of an attitude, a particular attitude of survival, staying alive and showing up. Right? These are patients who in the countertransference, we can find all kinds of reasons to not want to meet them on a particular day in the playroom or the consulting room because of their destructive efforts. Staying alive and showing up. After each phase, there comes reward in terms of love, reinforced by the fact of the backcloth of unconscious destruction. But this language involving the breast is jargon. The whole area of development and management is involved, in which adaptation is related to dependence. So we're not talking about just the feed. He's talking here about the full court management of these destructive efforts. It could be around feeding routines, omnipotence around sleeping routines, omnipotence around whether they have to go here or go there or not go here or there. The word destruction is needed not because of the baby's impulse to destroy, but because of the object's liability not to survive, which also means a change in quality or attitude. So the technique on the part of the adult is keeping your cards very close to your chest and not sharing and amplifying your frustration and challenges and changes in mood. The psychotherapeutic technique is maintaining a calm, firm, unyielding stance. where the child can learn that their omnipotence cannot change the quality of the attitude of the therapist or the frame of the treatment. We have this notion that's put forth by Winnicott, which turns psychoanalytic theory of aggression on its head. We have Freud in Civilizations and its Discontents, talking about how it's society and civilization, which is always limiting us and frustrating us and creating these breakthrough aggressions because we're not getting our libidinal and our ego needs met. So from reality making us aggressive, Winnicott puts forth this idea of aggression creating reality. In Orthodox theory, aggression is reactive to the encounter with the reality principle, whereas here it is the destructive drive that creates the quality of externality. Annihilation is the hopeless state that exists in the absence of a facilitating environment. So instead of one being able to try to destroy the object, one is left in a hopeless state of feeling annihilated, themselves destroyed. Anger is an emotional response after this phase, a response to being dropped by caretaker in the consolidated phase of the depressive position. Hey, wait a minute. What about me? You guys forgot about me here. So this sense of being dropped can be communicated through anger after this consolidation. However, this anger means something very different at this point developmentally, when somebody is between relating and use. There is no anger in the destruction of the object to which I am referring, though there could be said to be joy at the object's survival. So we have a sequence here of developmental events that the child needs to move through with the support of the facilitating environment. And this sequence leads to mutuality. This is such a profound developmental period that one can move fully into relating with other people as a whole person. Right? This is the entrance into mutuality. It's extremely profound. And many adults don't reach into this phase. They've never been able to get there. And they're left operating and object relating through adulthood. So we begin, the subject relates to the object. And here we're as if, right? As if the object were under subject's omnipotent control. You're there for me and for no other reason. The object is in the process of being found instead of placed by the subject in the outside world. Gradual acknowledgement that the object exists as separate with their own life and challenges. Subject destroys the object through words and deeds. And this is where this unconscious compulsion to destroy, to do those very things that are going to be so difficult for the parent or the therapist to survive. And the value that they have in survival is tremendous. You know, I think of the example of the guy heading out to the used car lot, and he's walking around this car, smiling that he likes, and he's kicking the tires with his foot. He's slamming the door and the trunk going up and down and the hood. And And somebody's like, what are you doing banging up this car like this? Hey, I want to make sure I have a good car, one that's reliable. So much of these destructive efforts are in the service of finding that reliable adult outside of their control. So when a child is limited and placed on a timeout or some type of consequence, that discipline is outside of the child's influence, outside of their omnipotent control, and must be accepted that they can't control this. And that's why these approaches to this developmental phase are so important, that it's an unyielding limit that the child can't influence with their tantrum or their attitude. The object survives the destruction. And here we're talking about the absence and the change of attitude or retaliation. And at this point, the subject can move into making use of the object, love, care about, rely upon, express anger and disappointment during lapses of care. And this is all part of this Winnicottian idea that the adult, the therapist, they're both found and created by the child, so the child can lay claim on them. We're going to take our break right now and come back for part 2 of a discussion on our personal reflections, provide some more case examples, and apply this more generally to society. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon for part 2.